I never would have considered doing this had people not told me that, hey, you'd be a really good professor. And absent that external feedback, I probably never would have tried.
This is Akash. He went to Harvard, worked at the Fed, started 2 startups, taught law, and now teaches finance. But none of this would have happened if he hadn't learned how to listen to what the world was already telling him.
The way I think about external validation is that it's a price signal from the market. When I left the Fed to start being a founder, I had friends that were pushing me for 2 to 3 years. When are you going to quit?
If you've been wanting to start something, this conversation might be the signal you've been looking for. All right, Akash, let's jump right in. You have one of the most interesting backgrounds of anybody that I've interviewed. You got your master's at Harvard, then you went to law school, then you were a law professor. You also now are a finance professor. You've started a startup. You did a project with the DoD. You've worked at the Fed. You've done all sorts of these awesome things. But my favorite thing that you've done is your blog. And you're an excellent writer, which to me means you're an excellent thinker. And you distill things down. I wish I could read that thing all day, but we're going to distill down just some of the favorite things that I've come across, as well as what you think most people get wrong and what they should know about finance and about frameworks and about personal development and business. So let's jump into first, why is external validation sometimes a good thing?
So the way I think about external validation is that it's a price signal from the market. Anybody who's been in finance for a while, if you have a private asset, let's say I own a restaurant or I made an investment in my friend's startup, and there's no stock market for it. How do I know what that's worth? I have an internal sense of what I think it's worth. I may be able to look at the metrics and judge what I think it is worth, but I'm prey to my own biases. And the external validation, I think, is super important for people that have a lot of negative self-talk. So imagine that you are an investor in a startup and all you can see is what's wrong. For example, I'm not an eloquent speaker. I'm not a great writer. I'm not good at math. Whatever the negative self-talk is, we all have it. We all have it. And if that is the only audience that we listen to, we're going to have a very warped sense of what we're worth in the market. And when I say in the market, I don't necessarily mean the job market. I just mean anything that we can do in life. So what I like about external validation, and I want to just offer people this frame, is that if somebody comes along and pays us an unsolicited compliment, that is the equivalent of an investor coming along in the market and saying that this private investment that you own, I would like to buy it.
Right, which is like, as I was reading that blog post, I put it in my newsletter, I literally changed my mind about what I think about external validation as I was reading it, which is such a powerful thing in itself. And I really resonate with this idea of like, oh, you know, nothing necessarily in isolation is great or bad, but if my self-talk sometimes can be critical, and that is the signal or the price signal as you frame it, it's like probably good to get some other signals out there.
Absolutely. It's like having a doctor give you a second opinion, for example.
Right.
On something as like a critical medical procedure. Even if you trust your doctor, a lot of times doesn't hurt to get a second opinion.
Right. But it's especially true if your doctor, you know, didn't go to med school and is like really cynical. and that could just be our own self-talk, right?
Absolutely.
And for you, have you always thought this, or have you changed your mind about this external validation?
This was a realization that I had. And so you mentioned that I teach as a professor. I never would have considered doing this had people not told me that, hey, you'd be a really good professor. I used to give talks in DC on mortgage finance when I worked in the Fed. I was a mortgage-backed securities trader there. And so occasionally I'd give these like finance lectures to political people on how does the mortgage-backed securities market work. And I think I had a talent or a gift or whatever you want to call it for taking these complicated things and distilling them into ways that people can understand it. And so people would come up to me afterwards and say, hey, you should be a professor. Never, ever considered doing that. And absent that external feedback, I probably never would have tried.
Yeah. So one of my other takeaways that I'm realizing here, and that like people watching this can realize for themselves, I like to think of it as like, what is the smallest unit of action, or like what's the actual tangible takeaway? And to me, it might be a little meta, but the smallest unit of action is to do things to get more feedback, right?
Totally.
If you're not getting, if the only talk that you have is just your self-talk, you're not putting yourself out there enough, whether it's writing blog posts or actually how you and I met at the Austin Writers Club, 7 a.m. every Friday morning. We're just kind of having these interesting conversations. And then
Literally the best.
yeah, which is awesome. It's like the highlight of my week. We've had some awesome conversations. And then you were a huge part in pushing me to do this. And then I saw your blog and I was like, oh, wait a minute. This whole external validation thing is the exact thing that I needed to hear, because I do this, for AppSumo and for other, like, consult for other companies. But the thing I have been procrastinating on is my own thing. And what did you tell me?
Like, you got to do this. Like, do it now. I'll support you.
Right. And then, you offered to be a guest as well. And so it's like it's not the first time I've heard that, but it was the right message for me at the right time.
Yeah.
And so for anyone listening to this, takeaway might just be like, people might hear, go do more things, but it's like, get more feedback in different ways.
Yeah.
And are there any other ways that you would encourage people to think about it?
I definitely love that idea of the creativity and just putting yourself out there and getting feedback. But I'd also say, think back on your past. So maybe you don't need to do anything different today, but what have people been consistently telling you, especially if you've been resisting it? So one other thing people have told me over much of my career is, like, you'd be really good at sales. And that did not comport to my self-image of myself. I always thought of myself as a more analytical person. I should be the person analyzing the trade in front of a computer, etc. But even people that I worked with in finance said that you'd be really good at sales. And I had this image of a salesperson being this guy at a bar. I don't drink. At a bar, glad handing people and all that kind of stuff. And I'm like, I'm not that guy. But that is not necessarily the profile of a good salesperson. The best thing to be a good salesperson is, do I care about the customer and their problem?
Right.
Which I care deeply about customers and their problems.
Right.
Other people were able to see that way before I did. So my entire self-image of myself has changed.
And what does your self-image look like today, and what did it look like?
I'm good at sales. And I like sales.
Right.
You told me that 10 years ago, dude. I would have been like, no way, you're crazy.
Yeah. And for some people too, I think using through the lens of letting constraints breed creativity, where they might be like, oh yeah, I want to try this other thing, but I'm busy or whatever. I'm remembering what made me think of it, as you mentioned, of like, look for the clues and things you're already doing. So for somebody watching this, like, what are the lowest hanging fruit opportunities in their life where they could kind of test these things and get more feedback from the market?
Well, maybe first thing, just go with like your friends who ask you to give a speech at the wedding. That's already a clue from the market that somebody believes in an ability for you to do something. If your friends didn't trust you to do a good job with that, whether or not you have previous public speaking or experience or not, they never would have asked you. So when people are asking, let's talk about the audience today. People in the audience, if people are asking you to help with certain things, like, that's a clue that you have a skill that they find valuable. It could be something like, for example, if somebody's planning a party and they're saying that, hey, I could really use your help in getting all this stuff organized. They see you as an organized person. Let's say, for example, you are working at a software company and you do that. Well, maybe the thing to do is, maybe you should get a project management certification, because it's a natural skill you already have. The market is giving you feedback that I want your help in doing this. Sometimes I've told students in the past, like, oftentimes having a hard skill like software engineering combined with a process or a soft skill, whether it's sales, public speaking, project management, whatever it is, when you can combine those two things, that's really powerful.
Right.
So for somebody like that, well, what's the lowest hanging fruit, like taking a certification or volunteering for something where I can test whether I have the skill?
Yeah. And as you're describing that, it's making me think of another signal that I've ignored, but it's coming to be more and more top of mind. Friend of mine a couple weeks ago just texted me. He's like, hey, I have a big decision coming up. Would love to talk through it with you. And that has happened probably 10 times over the last handful of years of some sort of big career decision usually. And maybe I had quit my job in Chicago, took this mini sabbatical, moved here, and partially that's probably why, but I kind of have like redefined or recreated whatever I'm doing every couple of years. And very big on like alignment in personal values and work values and all that. And so that is becoming, I was like, oh, that's another signal. This is exactly what you're talking about, right?
Exactly. So, I mean, dude, like I'm so excited hearing this. That's why you're doing this, man. Like, that's it. That's the market telling you, Mitchell, you're good at this.
Right. And so you have a bunch of these frameworks. You also have this 9-part series of what I believe is like another thing I was reading and I was like, this is so good because you take this complex thing, finance, and then you distill it down into very like understandable terms. But then you take another one of my favorite things, personal development, and then you draw these like amazing parallels to like how I could think about this in a more clear way, and things from like making sure the balance sheet balances and what are some of these assets that are monetary but also non-monetary and the strings attached to them.
Yeah.
And so like where did you come up with this, and what is the most useful framework that you've come across?
How I came up for I was teaching the introductory corporate finance class at UT last semester, and it's very similar I used to teach an independent finance 101 to just anybody who wanted to learn finance. And I always started with those 3 basic finance concepts. To me, they underpin 95% of what happens in finance. And that's what's a balance sheet, what is time value of money, and the relationship between risk and return. And I think about those in an academic or hard finance context a lot. And then since I do this emotional work as well in this writing, I was just like, one day it hit me that, yeah, when I start a romantic relationship, for example, that's an asset. That also comes at a cost. So if I have a significant other that hopefully net positive, but there's going to be something that is being taken away from me as part of that. At the very least time, that's like a liability or a cost.
Right. And one of the lines that you had was let me find it real quick. Yeah. So most people see that risk as something to avoid, but staying in a fast moving world, but staying still in a fast moving world could be a dangerous move. Risk isn't about jumping into an unknown. It's understanding which risks are worth taking. Sometimes not taking risks can be the biggest failure of all. And the example may be staying in a job or an industry too long. And so where do you think people are misunderstanding this maybe?
At a very macro level, so risk in finance, risk and return go together. And for the most part, markets are efficient most of the time. So if you see a high return opportunity in the market in terms of rate of return, chances are the risk is pretty high. If you want something that's super low risk, the market is not going to give you much financial return for it. For the most part, markets mostly efficient most of the time. However, with individual people, I think there is tremendous opportunity to generate alpha, meaning returns above what the market should give you based on risk in our personal lives, because I think we as humans, this may be the most important piece out of the frameworks. We are really, really bad at pricing risk personally. For example, when I quit my job in 21, when I left the Fed to start being a founder, terrifying. I had friends that were pushing me for 2 to 3 years. When are you going to quit? When are you going to quit?
Singles.
I was really scared. I mean, for them, they just wanted me to confront my fear and get over the fear. And one thing about that is that it's actually way less dangerous, especially for somebody like me, because I'd been working in finance. I had savings. I can afford to take that risk. So even though it feels terrifying for me, it's not the same level of danger for me as it is for somebody that has a spouse and 3 children and relying on them. Like the risk tolerance is different. And said another way, my risk tolerance should have been much higher than it was, given my resources and my training and my ability to do something. So I was not pricing that risk accurately. Now, I quit my job. I've been a disaster as a founder, but I don't regret that, because even taking the risk, I learned so much. I'm just like super confident in ways that I wasn't before.
Yeah, it's perhaps one of the best ways to learn more about yourself. And one of the analogies I have in my head is that these lead dominoes that are everywhere, almost like, stacks. You can't see behind them or how hard it would be to push them over. But every now and then you could push one over and a bunch of them fall down. And then you see all these other opportunities from there. And then others you try to push over and you don't. And so it's like, oh, well, I've only just been standing in front of this one domino. Might as well just go push some other dominoes down and see what happens. And I think that's what you've discovered now, and like several times looking at your like what you've done in your career.
Yeah, I agree.
And so like back to the frameworks, has this helped you personally or other people? Any other specific examples that you think will be helpful for people to think through?
For me, the frameworks are everything I write is an after effect of something that has been top of mind for me recently, or something that I realized after I've experienced it. So I don't write so much about things that, for example, I want to do, or emotional territory I haven't crossed yet. A lot of times it's the emotional territory I'm in the process of crossing or have crossed recently.
For your own life, going back to that fear of quitting your job, even though your friends were saying, hey, you'd be really good at these other things, do it. Where do you think that fear comes from, and like how did you think through it or navigate it?
The fear comes from, it's a safety survival instinct that we all have. What's familiar is safe. What's unknown is dangerous. Why are people scared of the dark? Because I can't see a threat in the dark. If it's light outside, I can at least have vision to protect me and can react. And that's the basic thing. Why is somebody afraid of going up to a stranger at South by Southwest and introducing themselves? There's a whole lot of like negative self-talk. What if I come across as stupid? What if I'm foolish? What if I say the wrong thing? What if I'm wasting this person's time? We just have this comes back to mispricing risk. We have all these doomsday scenarios in our mind. So we're imagining this is like the risk manager looking at the VAR, value at risk, and saying, okay, this is a Six Sigma downward event, but that doesn't happen all that often. It almost never, in real life, it almost never happens.
Totally. And especially if this risk manager, or if this person at a young age, I'll just use me for example.
Yeah.
My fear comes from, I think at a young age of, ultimately not being good enough.
Yeah.
And so whether that means getting cut from the basketball team,
yep,
or whether that means being shorter than most people, or whether that means getting just being average unless I apply myself. So for example, I found over the years I could work really hard and get above average results. And then I sort of got addicted to that, right? Of like, oh, well, in sports, I wasn't good enough, so I have to overcompensate. And then I sort of went the other way of like overly optimizing things, which I've learned in the last couple of years through therapy and among other things, of there's dials to it.
Yeah.
And there's times in my life when being analytical has been really good and being driven has been good. Then there's also times where it's like, oh, dude, relax a little bit, turn the dial down and like turn off your computer and relax. But I think it's helpful for me to at least understand where this comes from, and my wiring out of the box is perhaps, oh yeah, this is that thing where I try to over optimize. I'm not going to do that here. I'm just going to pick one of these and go for it. And ultimately being like trying to get curious where it comes from and how to use it. I guess how has your experience been with that?
I'll respond to that by following up on something that you said about this voice, which is I'm not good enough, which many of us have. Like, it's not just you. Probably everybody listening, we have this self-flagellation. I don't want to demonize that voice, that voice is also part of our psyche, and it's trying to help. It just has a skewed perspective of the world. So this is a post I wrote. I can't remember the title of it, but I said, imagine that negative voice. I'm a lawyer, so I think about sometimes things in terms of narratives and courtroom context. Our true self is like the judge. And it's harmful when only the prosecution gets to make a case, the negative self-talk. And what I challenge readers to do in that post is said, okay, well, what if this was a courtroom and you know that you had the prosecution on autopilot saying criminal, murder, all that kind of stuff, all the negative stuff. What if the defense got to present a case? What would it say? And one thing, especially in the finance education that I did, the independent stuff, was the biggest damage that a lot of people do to themselves is they have this negative self-talk around money, which is, I'm not good at math, I'm not good at finance. And so they won't even try. And so what I would try to do is introduce some positive evidence to give that defense lawyer a voice. Now, coming back to what you were saying about the I'm not good enough voice, I don't want to banish the prosecution from the courtroom either. That when two lawyers are in a courtroom, the ideal of the legal system is that we're trying to get to the truth. And I don't want positive affirmations, cheerleader, self-talk either. I'm not convinced that that's good. What I want is for me, to be wise enough to listen to both and take the counsel of who's the correct counsel in the right moment.
I love that so much. I haven't thought of it that way. And I agree. There's actually research that shows the positive affirmations in the mirror does way more damage than it does good, because your brain, it's not dumb. And so it's basically telling yourself this lie that you know isn't true. And so I think people overdo it with oh, I'm going to state these affirmations. No, dude, don't do that. That's actually doing more harm than good. Instead, I love the analogy. I'm going to start to think about this too of oh, this is just the prosecutor. What would an example be from the defense side? What's a small micro nugget of well, actually I'm pretty good at, writing or whatever. And oh shoot, I don't have any evidence. Well, what would be some really good evidence that I could go gather this week? And then it's almost like this fun game, knowing that oh man, that prosecutor is really annoying because he's always first to talk, and sometimes the defense doesn't get a chance to see the other side.
And ultimately, I want in the legal system, I want to value the role that both the prosecution and the defense play, because the legal system doesn't work without both of them.
Right. And back to the truth, you're talking about, what is the truth? And some of this external validation are clues for the truth.
Exactly.
Having really close friends that give you really honest and pure feedback, who know you really well, because sometimes it's hard to read the label from inside the bottle in ourselves. But it's you have a friend dude, it's so obvious, go do this, or hey, actually, have you thought about it this way? There might be something else going on here. And I think that's such a helpful frame for people too, but also me. I'm going to start thinking I'm not a lawyer. I'm going to start thinking of oh, we got this defense, and where's the judge in this stuff? And so yeah, that's super helpful.
Yeah, I should find that post. I wrote it a long time ago. I'll send it to you.
Yeah, we'll link it in the show notes. What any other frameworks that have been helpful for you or for some of your students as you're teaching? You taught a lot, and you've also done a lot of things. So maybe even broaden it. Can you just give a quick rundown of some of the things you've done, and we'll go from there?
Yeah, I was a management consultant at McKinsey. That was my first job out of law school. I've never practiced law. I was a summer associate at a firm, and then that was basically the financial crisis. So we did a lot of cleanup of bank balance sheets. That was the consulting work. Then I found I liked finance, so I joined. Nobody was hiring other than the Federal Reserve, so they hired me to be a mortgage-backed securities trader on their some of the quantitative easing rescue programs after the crisis. Then I was a bond portfolio manager in Europe for 2 years. We ran about 30 billion of sovereign fixed income, so medium-sized portfolio. And then I came back to the Fed in 2017 and was a Europe analyst for a while. And then during COVID, I was the number 2 guy on one of the bailout facilities. And then that was basically the last thing that was on my bucket list. My friends, I mean, probably from a risk standpoint, I should have left earlier, but it is what it is. One other piece of external validation, I remember a woman, I think she was the Fed's chief of staff or former chief of staff. She told me, like, you're wasted here. You should quit. You need to be running something. That was a very senior person that I'd worked with directly. And that was, again, a piece in that puzzle of, okay, well, maybe I should quit. And it took me a while to act on that advice, probably 3 years.
And what led you to then teaching?
So I started 2 companies that were not successful. I'll just very high level. The first one was a lack of founder product fit or founder market fit. And then the second one was probably built the classic mistake of building a product without truly validating customer demand. And I was looking for something to do, and the finance department was like, why don't you come over? And I was like, well, I've been a professor. I was an adjunct at NYU when I lived in New York. That was just 1 class or 2 classes, some semesters.
And through all those experiences, now when you're teaching students about Finance 101 or some of these other concepts, is there anything that resonates the most or that you think that most people should understand but don't?
Probably the most important finance concept itself is time value of money, which I'm guessing your audience is extremely familiar with. And the personal framework there is stuff compounds. So I was nervous about writing that blog post. It was hard to put my thoughts. I've always liked writing, but the emotional stuff, I didn't know how to write about it for a long time. And then now it's like, I won't say it's easy, but it's not a huge mental lift. I've found my voice. I can knock out a blog post in 3 hours typically, and people seem to like it. And what I'm really proud of is that now anytime I meet somebody, I can say, hey, I've written on this stuff, and I have a giant body of work to send them to.
And I think starting out, we have a bunch of time and not the greatest opportunities. And so you kind of work more and you just like figure out you don't have that many skills. And then at a certain point that inverses, right? Where you have more opportunities than you have time. You can't do everything, right? And so I think it's helpful having some of these frameworks to be like, what projects do I want to take on? And how can I be selective where regardless if they fail, I still win? Other things that you think would be helpful for maybe somebody watching this is a solopreneur, has a business, doesn't have a finance background, and maybe they're using QuickBooks, maybe they're not. And I've helped a few local business owners now, and they seem to not have a good grasp on their business finances.
So are we talking more about the emotional dimension or the learning dimension?
Well, I guess at this point, whatever would be most helpful for them, but I think a little bit more of like the actual business finance and understanding their business better from a numbers perspective.
Yeah, so I'll start with emotions and show how that goes into finance. So since I have worked with a lot of solopreneur types, people are smart, man. The people that have a narrative that I don't understand finance, this is again the defense lawyer that's shouting. And we've got another lawyer in the room. We got to listen to that lawyer. So a lot of people have this internal narrative, so they won't even try to engage with the numbers. I think the most important thing for any entrepreneur to learn is just what are financial statements? What is a balance sheet? What is an income statement? Why do they exist?
I guess how would you explain it in simple terms for somebody who's like, I'm not really good with numbers, and like, how do I get started?
Yeah, so the simple maybe watch that video might be a decent way to get started. I mean, I'm sure there's a zillion tutorials of like basic, or you could even talk to ChatGPT may not be the best because it's going to give you text, but I would say, can you stomach for even 10 minutes sitting down and trying to figure out what a balance sheet is? Because it's overwhelming for a lot of people. And so that emotion of fear and overwhelm, that's the first barrier. If we can get past that barrier, I promise you, anybody listening to you, dude, like they're more than smart enough to tackle this.
Yeah, I love that. Anticipate that barrier. Oh,
Yes.
it's going to come up.
Yes.
Oh, this is natural. Akash said it out. Okay, this is that. Okay, now, and just real quick, balance sheet snapshot in time.
Yes.
The health of the business, assets, liabilities, shareholders' equity.
Yep.
And then what's the next one you would say?
The income statement. So that is what's happening in the business over a period of time. How much revenue is coming in? What are your expenses? What do you owe in taxes? What do you have to pay in terms of debt per month or per quarter or per year? And then what's left over is your net income. So that's actually how much, if you're a solopreneur, probably your salary is coming out of that. Depends on how you handle the accounting. The other thing that I would say for everybody, the other emotional barrier a lot of people have is like they feel like the stuff needs to be perfect. And so if my balance sheet isn't perfect, my income statement isn't perfect. Oh no. It's that fear response, which again, humans, we misprice the fear. It doesn't need to be perfect. One thing I say in my class at the very beginning, the independent class, not the UT class, is financial statements are just documents that are attempting to describe what's happening in a business. They are made for the user, and they're made to the user specifications. You can make your balance sheet and your income statement however you want. You are not having this audited by the IRS. This is for you as a strategist and as a CEO to have a view of what's going on in your business. And so it doesn't need to follow generally accepted accounting principles.
Right. That's a really good point. And maybe too, for somebody listening to this, I was thinking about this on the way over here, where first it's like, get some sort of tool, QuickBooks, whatever, something to just get your numbers organized into these reports. Right. And then from there, perhaps there's even a business opportunity, but like export those and like look at your balance sheet in some of these reports and import that into ChatGPT and just say, have a conversation, like help me understand this in a more simpler way.
Totally.
And perhaps like the business idea, somebody could take this prompt of like, hey, first here I work with QuickBooks or whatever your accounting software is, and then take this prompt and then start to get into more of the specifics of like, oh, are you actually like doing all your proper write-offs, and even that fee itself that this consultant could charge the business owner, be like, oh, I'm going to save you enough money where it's going to waive my fee because I'm going to find these things. And I think with a lot of these things, and my experience with consulting for local business owners has been back to the emotional thing where it's like, yeah, there's these numbers, blah, 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 but there's inside this fear of like, I'm not doing enough, or everything's going to go away, or I just need somebody to talk to. And so oftentimes I've found of like local SEOs just kind of like opening the door, but then they're like, hey, come check out the rest of this stuff going on in here. And there's a lot of other things going on, and it can maybe be lonely for a solopreneur or business owner.
It's very lonely. That's tough, dude.
Yeah. Any other things that have been most, before we wrap up, this has been awesome. Thank you not only for coming in today and also sharing all your wisdom, but also for the nudge to get us here. And I'm leaving this, like I told you on the way over, just excited and grateful that I expanded my surface area a little bit, went to the writing club, had awesome conversations with you, now have become friends with you. And through that lens, you gave me this nudge to do this thing that I wanted to do, but I was procrastinating on.
Yeah.
And so for that, thank you. And for anybody else listening, I think some of the takeaways are all the same. It's like, just start with that micro action for any of this stuff. And then the plans will change, the stuff will change. But those oftentimes are the breadcrumbs that lead you to the other things. And anything else that you want to add?
Yeah, I'll add just one short thing,
Please.
bouncing off what you just said. You use the word excitement, which is something I love. That's also a super important emotion to listen to. So fear, great. Anger, great. All these are valuable. I feel like many of us don't listen to our excitement enough. And the very short story I'll tell on this, the entire blog and the reason I met you, that came out of this project that I was working on, which I call Emotions in Finance. I had 3 personal finance conversations, and I'm not a financial advisor. I'm a Wall Street guy. That's different. And I really enjoyed talking to people about their personal finance stuff, but more than that, what's going on for them emotionally in terms of being decisions that are tough to make. And I just decided to follow my own excitement. So I reached out to people and I said, can I talk to you about what finance means to you emotionally? Specifically, I want to ask you, how do you feel about money? And I had 128 conversations up to this point that started in 23. I have another one scheduled for next week. And I had so much volume of material following my own excitement. And basically, like, this is the other reason I know I'm meant to be a founder, is because I love doing customer discovery. I just love talking to people, and kind of like you're maybe slightly different application than you, but I think we have that in common. And just taking that and having so much raw material and realizing, okay, I actually have some insight to add. And if I had not followed my excitement, I would have not had those conversations. I would have not started writing the blog. I would not have gone to writing group. I would not have met you. And this podcast wouldn't be out there in the world. That excitement, that was the clue. Internal excitement. This was not external validation. This is a different price signal from a different market participant.
Right. I love that. What is your excitement telling you today?
This is super fun, man. That's it.
Yeah.
I'm really glad I met you. I guess the excitement is that I want to continue putting my ideas out into the world. I already knew that, but this has been super fun. So following the fun, following the excitement.
100%. We'll link everything in the show notes. Where can people check you out?
My blog, which is akashkanojia.com, is the best place to find me. There's links to LinkedIn, Twitter, Insta on there.
And you have like guides, as well as I think it's emotions at the top right of the blog, where it's where people can read more.
And I write hard finance stuff as well. So what's going on in the market? What's the jobs report? What do I think about the economy? That's not quite as frequent. My emotions finance is every week, but I'm going to be putting more content out there.
Dude, you're awesome. Thank you, man.